Welcome to Stand By Please.
With me, Antonia Collins from the Bamboo Manager Project.
And me, Jacqui George from Sharjah Performing Arts Academy.
In this podcast, we talk all things stage management. Join us and our guests as we try to answer the question, what is your stage manager really thinking?
I've been thinking about resilience loads this week, not only to do with theatre, but also to do with current climate. And I'm not going to say in these unprecedented times, that word once more, but resilience is so important. And how do we inbuild that into young stage managers, or not even young? I think older stage managers could benefit from stretching that resilience technique.
Yeah. I think it's a skill to learn, like any other skill in terms of stage managers and the training of young stage managers. I like to talk about resilience quite a lot, but I like to talk about it in two different ways. So, and one is easier to deal with than the other. So the physical resilience, if you like, the resilience of you physically, and then emotional resilience or mental resilience in that way. And certainly I believe that looking after one of those feeds into the other one. So I always feel like when I talk to students about this, I come across as some, wannabe super fit stage management person. I'm clearly not. I know it makes a world of difference to me if I'm well rested, if I've had plenty of sleep, if I'm eating healthily and drinking loads of water, if I'm undertaking some form of exercise. And I try and encourage all stage managers to find some kind of time in their day to do some kind of exercise. And I'm a little bit obsessed about it. And I realised it's not for everybody. And it took me to the grand old age of 42 to find a form of exercise that I really enjoyed. So clearly it's not a one size fits all answer. For me, it's running. And the reason why running works for me is because it's actually half an hour or whatever where I don't look at my phone. I do take my phone out with me and I run to podcasts or music, but I'm not answering emails. I'm not constantly answering the demands of other people. So find something that works for you and prioritize it when you can. I'm not suggesting that in tech week, where you're in work from 8:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, you should be fitting in a run. Clearly what you're fitting in is a trip to a sandwich shop and a coffee. But I think, having that reserve, if you like, of when you're not working the very long hours, looking after yourself in some kind of way, really helps for me then feed into my emotional resilience. If I am calmer and, like I say, I've had sleep and I can understand that, although the director is very upset about this particular item at this particular second, it's not actually the end of the world. And that allows me then to be rational in my response.
Maybe we'll come back to social media resilience in a minute, because that's something I'm trying desperately hard to work on myself at the moment. Just thinking about that trajectory of a show and of a production process. And it always amazes me that I can pretty much guarantee if I'm in a show, if I'm doing a show, I can start off with all those amazingly good intentions and I make time to exercise, and I do my yoga in the morning, and I will make sure I've got my packed lunch, and I do find some downtime, and then that slowly gets less disciplined as the show goes on, and then by the time you get to tech and then the get out, I can absolutely predict when I'm going to get a cold.
But that's that's understanding the cycle, isn't it, of a show life in that sense. And that's about being, I hate the word sensible. I hate being sensible with every bone in my body. But the sensible bit then is when you're not on the show is to build those reserves back up. Now, I've no idea whether, if you asked a sleep specialist, whether that was humanly possible. But I just know that if I look after myself better in the in the easier times, then when I get to the trickier times, then and actually, sorry, I'm just gonna contradict myself there, because the trickier times in the cycle of the show, yes, the trickier times in terms of working hours is going to be in tech, but actually the kind of psychological tricky times can be all the way through.
Maybe a third factor that we're having to deal with a bit more now is that social media resilience and how we protect ourselves from that in a show. So again, in current times, we're bombarded with activities to do, free shows to watch, somebody else is streaming something, and maybe we're contributing to this. How do you think we build up, and I completely agree with you in building up our physical resilience, and that will help build up our reserves of emotional resilience. How do we build up that skill set of working well with social media and that social media resilience?
I wish I knew the answer, Jacqui. It does. I mean, it does make me think of that phrase by Thelma Holt, the producer, that a good stage manager has a degree in child psychology and the skin of a rhinoceros/elephant, dependent on who you talk to, who tells you this line. But I think, the psychology of building your own emotional resilience is really complicated, and I too feel like we're bombarded by things currently. Absolutely. Like, I must have been the only person in the world that didn't watch the National Theatre's streaming of Two Men, One Governor, because I was like, not really that bothered, actually. But then I saw all these people on Twitter going, oh my God, it was amazing. It was amazing. And I was like, oh, did I miss out now? Maybe I should have prioritized watching it. I think you have to know about you, right? So I like to know the news. I like to know what's happening in the world. I'm very happy to look at my phone and let things tick past me. That's fine. But for a different person, that might not work for them. So in which case, then, it's time to use the do not disturb button, isn't it? But it's about knowing your limits as well, I think. I'm certainly a news junkie. I could have the news on all day long and watch it in different countries. That's just in my nature. I'm not losing sleep over it. I've always been the same. I've always been a researcher. The way the smartphone has transformed my life, the only person who's in charge of your phone is you. So if you need a break from your phone isn't going to switch itself off. You have to and that's what I was saying about the running. That's why the running works for me, because while I'm busy sweating and, struggling to breathe, I'm not looking at my phone. Yeah, the only person who can deal with it is you in that sense. I'm going to be ageist a minute, I think, because when I went to university, my mother and I had a phone call on a Sunday at 2:00. That was it. And I didn't expect to hear from her any other time, because there was no other way to hear from her unless she wrote to me a letter. There were no mobile phones. It didn't exist. And I think that kind of constant contact thing has fueled the picking up of the phone, the looking at the phone, all of those things. And I wonder whether that also doesn't help the situation.
I never want to lose that choice. I had a crazy thought earlier in the midst of doing some e-learning with my daughter, and then I was planning term 3's teaching remotely for our production students. And I thought, wow, can you imagine if this had happened when I was at school?
Yeah.
Learning would have stopped completely. So that, I think, this is absolutely incredible. But it's like anything, because one of my biggest issues with internet provision of what's going on, and I think I'm one of those people, I can filter the news. I'm a bit like you. I can read it, I can digest it, I can extract from it what I think is useful or relevant or true or good reporting. But the amount of poor content out there, not mentioning any names. I watched a very well-known streamed musical the weekend, and I honestly sat there and thought, what on earth is this for? This doesn't show good theatre practice for me, No. And I was talking to some friends about it the other day, and I don't really want to watch theatre shows online.
I'm not. If they were filmed to be shown that way, I think that's totally different. You know, there already exist companies that do that kind of work, and they're filmed to be seen in the cinema. Yes, okay. But watching the equivalent of somebody on their iPhone do some kind of archival recording of something gives no sense of what the show is really like at all, in my opinion. There's something going around online that's like, basically the premise is you're lazy if you don't do anything amazing during this difficult time. I'm paraphrasing, I can't quite remember what it says, but you know, it's like if you wanted to write a novel, now's the time to do it. And then somebody else has crossed out the bottom thing and said, no, that's not true at all. You know, we're all in a time that we've never experienced. So I think, you know, just kind of looking after yourself should absolutely be anybody's number one priority. But I suspect that for a lot of stage managers who are classic overachievers, sorry for the broad sweeping statement there, but, you know, classic people who like to do things and like a list and like to tick them off, and then all of a sudden there isn't really anything to tick off. That again is a very unusual set of circumstances.
This might be an obvious question with an obvious answer, but where on the ladder and how important is resilience for you as a stage manager in your stage management team and in that wider company?
For me, it's about self-preservation. For me, as a company stage manager, I need to be resilient to what else is going on around me, because actually my role, and literally a role, is to role model out my response to the rest of the company. When things happen that are unexpected or difficult, the way I respond to it as the kind of senior person is really important, because I think in general I'm pretty resilient in public. This is a totally other podcast now, I think. Well, I definitely have two sides. You know, I've got the kind of public persona side, and then I've got the private side that probably only my husband and children really ever see. And I can be totally professional and deal with something and then come home and cry about it. What I would call proper things, as opposed to I've broken a fingernail kind of thing. And you know, when I was out in America, we were involved in a situation where we had a live shooter outside the theatre, and afterwards that was terrifying. I mean, when I kind of got back to my apartment and thought about what had happened that night, but when I was in it, you kind of, I think probably a lot of stage managers would say the same thing, you sort of go to a different sort of slightly out of body experience. You know, when you have to stop a show or something, it's like a slightly out of body moment, isn't it? Where you're like, right, so what we're going to do is this, this and this. So I definitely think part of my resilience is having the company stage manager part of me and then the kind of personal part of me. I think I try and shield my stage management team from the harshest things, if you like. That's my job. I'm the one that should stand in between. You know, say somebody is having a meltdown over something and having a real go at my ASM because whatever, doesn't matter what it is, then part of my job is to stand between those people and to buffer for my ASM so that they're not taking the full heat of what's happening. Because normally as well in a theatre environment, the thing that's made somebody explode isn't actually a real thing. It's, you know, the prop was in the wrong place, which is awful. And that's, you know, it shouldn't be in the wrong place and all of those things, but it's not actually real life. And one of the tricks I tell other people about, and I totally stole this from a TV host called Stephen Colbert, and he's interviewed by Oprah Winfrey on her podcast, Super Soul Conversation. He's talking about when difficult things happen in your life and how when you're in it, it feels like the worst thing that could possibly happen. But he talks about trying to view it from much further back, like you were God almost, looking at a timeline of your life. And actually, in reality, it would be this tiny little glitch. Whereas when you're in it, it's this huge thing that's happening to you. And I think that idea of context and being able to pull it back and see it as a whole is actually, you know, quite a useful trick in that sense.
And I think it's really interesting actually hearing you talk about how, as a company manager, how you enforce that resilience or display that resilience, because there's that, you know, there's that emotional center part of our brain that'll do the classic fight, flight, or fright or freeze. And I think inherently there's something about stage managers who will fight. But I think it's really useful, and that's not saying there are absolutely times professionally when I've been in a situation where I've wanted to go and disappear and not want to deal with whatever that situation was. But that distance that you talk about, placing yourself back, remembering the context of where it is. And certainly for students, I think it's really important to recognise where they're at. And it's not about not emotionally investing or doing the best job you can. It's about putting it in context, isn't it? And actually saying, okay.
Absolutely. And, you know, anybody that's probably been taught by me in the classroom will have heard me say this already, so I apologise now. I would say I had no context in my stage management life at all until I had a baby. Now, that clearly I'm not recommending to people to have a baby to discover some context to your work life. But I was so in it. I was so in the show. I was so invested in it that if something went wrong, you know, I would take it home and worry about it. Don't even ask me about Let's Q77, still playing on my mind 20 years later. But, you know, I took it all really to heart. And then the day I had a baby, I just remember being in the hospital thinking, it's just you and me now, isn't it? I've got to be able to look after you. That's the deal here. And so I would encourage everybody to find their contacts through, normally, I guess, through your friends and family. But in life, you know, when we can do some amazing things in theatre shows, we can literally transform people's lives through theatre, but we're not open heart surgeons and we're not actually saving lives in that sense. And I think, you know, having some kind of context that you can draw back on. And one of the other things I was going to say was, I think, having somebody else that you can talk to who's not involved in the show, who is going to listen to what you say, not necessarily offer advice, but just somebody that you can speak at almost, that is going to treat it as confidential as well, is really, really useful.
Absolutely. It's that sounding board, isn't it? It's so important. And I could certainly hear and echo one of my most used taglines is, well, we're not doing brain surgery. Probably. Yeah. Yeah. But a lot of people, when it feels like for them that they are doing, you know, the job that's as worthy as brain surgery.
Yeah, and that doesn't, I think sometimes students misinterpret us when we talk about these kind of things, because, you know, we're not saying we don't want the show to be amazing. We're not saying that we don't want everybody to be, you know, working really hard and giving everything they've got. But what we are saying is it's not actually real life. It is dressing up on a stage. It's storytelling, isn't it? And you know, and it allows an audience to be transported to different places in their mind and have different experiences. And of course, lots of theatre is hugely educational and literally transformative. But at the end of the day, it is still dressing up.
And your best work is never going to come from anyone from a place of that scared or that sort of lack of performance that you have when you are too much invested in it, that you're not sleeping, you're not looking after yourself, you're not going to do your best work then.
I agree, though I can think of a few actors who might disagree with us, but then that's the fundamental difference between stage managers and actors as well. I think at the end of the day, you know, part of my job is to demonstrate that resilience. And don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of occasions when I have gone off and cried in a toilet. As you become older and you become more experienced and you've lived through the cycle of the creation of a show more often, So you recognise the pinch points because you're like, oh, no, here it comes. You know, don't you? You know when you go to work that day, you're like, oh, here it comes. It's going to be today. And that's just experience. That's just... And then hopefully you'll get to opening and hopefully it'll all be wonderful and everything will be forgiven.
And everything gets forgotten. You know, I think that's really important to remember, no matter how tense and how emotionally driven moments can be, that you have to be able to leave that within the four walls of the theatre and not hold those close to you when you see those people outside of that space. So, okay, what would be, I'm not going to put a number on it, but could you give me your top tips for resilience and building that resilience and emotional investment on working on a show?
So definitely don't take it personally. It's not about you. Quite often when something explodes, I'm going to say I'll be the director again, but it could equally be an actor, you know, or a music director, whatever. If they have a go about something, it's normally 9 times out of 10 not about you. Stage management are frequently the people who are in the firing line first. You know, actor comes off stage, something wasn't right. The first person they see is the stage manager. So, you know, it's just remembering that actually normally it's probably not about you at all. Tagged on to that, you know, a continuation of that thought really is that although when you work on shows you live in each other's pockets a lot of the time, the reality of life is that actually you don't really know what's going on for other people either. Mm-hmm. So just because they're really snappy that day, again, not necessarily about you. Could be something's happened at home, they've had some bad news, whatever. So I think that's just, you know, a good self-preservation tip in terms of your own approach to a situation. The other thing I would say is about context, remembering that you're only putting a show on. You want the show to be amazing, but that you have other things in your life that are more important than the show, is the honest answer. And just trying to, you know, remember that. Sometimes we need to remember that consciously. Like, whether that scene change is immaculate or not, we can try that again another day. And then the other thing, which we've not really touched on, but the medium that we've chosen to work in isn't going to be the same every day. So although the aim of the show is that the show is identical every day, because that's what we're aiming towards, it's not going to be, because it involves real humans, real operators, real props. And so when things go wrong, embrace the fact that they went wrong. You will find a way out of it. I know sometimes it feels like you don't, and you're going to find a way out of it. It might not have been the best way out of whatever went wrong, but you will find a way out of it. And 99.9% of the time, the audience are not even going to know that something went wrong. So don't then take it home and sweat over it. Learn from whatever happened. Maybe make a contingency plan of what to do if that happens again. Brilliant. We should all be contingency planning anyway, but I know it's the last thing we always think about. But don't take it home and have nightmares about it. Is everybody still all right? I always think keep the bar low, Jacqui. Do you know what I mean? Keep the bar low, and then we'll be all right. So, did we do a show? Did the audience enjoy it? Was it okay? Yes, it was. Great. Moving on. So learn from the experience, but don't then carry it with you because it is only a bit of dressing up on a stage.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been great to talk. We hope you enjoyed this pilot episode of Stand By Please. Join us next time when we'll be standing by Bruce Guthrie, Head of Theatre and Film at National Centre for the Performing Arts in Mumbai, as we delve into the uses and abuses of hierarchy in theatre. Till then, Jacqui and Antonia, off cans.